Greetings, good people. It has been actually a little while since I was on a roll for 12 episodes where I was going every two weeks, but that streak has come to an end, which is totally okay. Life be like that. And we came to the end of the school year to all my educator folks out there, just sending much love, congratulations on making it to the end of the school year and the semester and into summer. It is summer solstice as I record this, so happy summer solstice. Longest day of the year with regards to sunshine. I know all of us could use a little more literal and figurative sunshine in this decaying, falling empire. But just sending much love. I wanted to shout out um, uh, international listeners. To the folks in um, uh, Lao Democratic Republic, folks in Vietnam, in Canada, um, in Sweden, in Germany, the folks who are listening out there. I just want to thank you so much. I'm not sure how you came across my humble podcast, but very grateful for you and thank you for tuning in. Um, so here we go. The Paper Plane is a podcast created and hosted by myself, Colin Masashi Rohahio Erhara, where I interview people I am blessed and honored to share community with, asking them about a book or books that have had a transformative impact on their lives. And in a society where literacy rates are steadily declining, our attention spans and critical consciousness are under attack, and a growing number of podcasts hosted by cishet men consciously or unconsciously champion expressions of masculinity that come at the expense of women, femmes, and LGBTQIA2 Spirit Plus, especially BIPOC folks. This space imperfectly aims to operate as a counter narrative to those things. The Paper Plane is a space that intends to highlight the dire importance of relationships, community, dialogue, perpetual learning, honest expression as art, art as honest expression, freedom for literacy, and of course, literacy for freedom. It speaks to planes of existence attached to the act of reading, but also as a metaphor for the flights we take as we sit in what Ta-Nehisi Coates calls a one-way interface as readers and how these journeys shape us. So today's guest is someone I met over a decade ago as a graduate student at University of San Francisco's Urban Education and Social Justice teaching program. Dr. Patrick Camangian, what's up, Cam? Introduced us and she became my cooperating mentor teacher at a public charter school, 6 through 12 in Richmond, California. And since then, we have and continue to bond over teaching, music, and ultimately our aims to grow our critical consciousness, spirits, hearts, and minds amidst systems that attempt to stamp all of that out. I adore this dear sister, and I'm honored to have her on the paper plane today to discuss one of the most powerful books of our generation in Bell Hooks, All About Love. Anjali Rodrigues is a first generation Indian American and eldest daughter, an educator, a leadership and community organizing trainer, and a fútbol enthusiast. That's soccer for you Americanos. While studying at UCLA, she worked as a writing counselor in the community programs office, where she discovered the campus's rich legacy of organizing, particularly the role of the Black Panthers. After graduating, Anjali began her teaching career in Richmond, California, yay, and deepened her political development through the People's Education Movement and Teachers for Social Justice. In 2015, she earned her master's in arts and education from Harvard, where she also began teaching public narrative and community organizing alongside Dr. Marshall Gantz. From 2014 to 2022, Anjali taught in K through 12 schools in Boston and Brownsville, New York, while simultaneously leading workshops on public narrative and organizing for organizations across the country. Her collaborators have included Stand Up Indiana, the Sunrise Movement, March for Our Lives, Vital Voices, Regarding Power, and many more. That's probably pronounced Repower. She also founded the Warmth Fellowship, a leadership program for young femmes of color ages 15 to 29 that centers storytelling, peer coaching, and community care. Currently, Anjali serves as Deputy Director of Fellowships at Leadership for Democracy and Social Justice, where she leads the Social Change Fellowship, a year-long program for undergraduates in the City University of New York system who are interested in pursuing social movement work. And so it is with that I am so happy and excited to welcome my dear family. Anjali, thank you so much for being here, fam. It's so nice to see you. How are you doing?
Thank you for having me. Better now.
Yeah.
Happy to see you.
That's what's up. Yes, from across the country. Lovely. Look at what technology can do.
I put
Um,
my Oakland A's shirt on though for this, just to,
I
you know.
love it. Well, and after you told me that, I put on my Giants too. So yeah,
Hey.
an RIP to the Oakland Athletics, but we will always hold it down for the Bay. Um, yeah, just so happy that you're here and really excited to talk about this book. I kind of like was wondering, of like the amazing community that we have and are connected to. I was like, I wonder at some point who would be the first person to want to talk about a Bell Hooks book, and it's really cool that you are that person. And so as we jump into things, so All About Love, New Visions is a book by Bell Hooks published on December 22nd, 1999. It's been a minute that discusses aspects of love in modern society. The book is organized into 13 chapters, in which each chapter discusses an aspect of love. Within these chapters, Hooks also provides the reader with reflections on her own journey of love, as well as an analysis of society's teachings of love. In the preface of the book, Bell Hooks writes about being abandoned from love in her girlhood. While she does not provide the reader with context to the details of that abandonment, Hooks reflects to the reader that she realized that all the years she was looking for love, she was truly longing to heal from the initial abandonment. Hooks writes that when she finally got herself moved on from that incident and ready to love in the present, she felt that the world she lives in, our world, became loveless. Hooks ends the preface of the book with an explanation of why she chooses to write about love. She writes, "I write of love to bear witness both to the danger of this moment and to call for a return to love. Redeemed and restored, love returns us to the promise of everlasting life. When we love, we can let our hearts speak." Woo! Two sections are particularly important in this text, and they are entitled Clarity and Honesty, and these will be the driving themes of our discussion today. So, in the clarity section, uh, talking about giving love words. So, in the first chapter of the book, Hooks describes how love is used, but no one quite knows the definition of it. Hooks says that the definition that she finds most fitting is the one that M. Scott Peck uses. And as mentioned in the book, Peck defines love as quote unquote the will to extend oneself for the purpose of nurturing one's own or another's spiritual growth. Love is an act of will, namely both an intention and an action. Will also implies choice. We do not have to love, we choose to love. And the second aspect, honesty, be true to love. In this section, Hooks discusses why, in particular, the act of loving has changed recently. Hooks discusses how women are encouraged by sexist socialization to pretend and manipulate to lie as a way to please, and how men are taught to create a false self that is not vulnerable as a way to remain powerful. In this, she says, to know love, we have to tell the truth to ourselves and others. Creating a false self to mask fears and insecurities has become so common that many of us forget who we are and what we feel underneath the pretense. Breaking through this detail is always the first step in uncovering our longing to be honest and clear. She also says the wounded child inside many males is a boy who, when he first spoke his truths, was silenced by paternal sadism, by a patriarchal world that did not want him to claim his true feelings. The wounded child inside females is a girl who was taught in early childhood that she must become something other than herself, deny her true feelings, in order to attract and please others. To be loving, we must willingly hear each other's truth, and most importantly, we affirm the value of truth telling.
Mm-hmm.
And so, as we open things up, this is a question that I always ask all my guests. And it is, what made you choose this text specifically for us to discuss? And what journeys would you say that it has taken you on?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. When you asked me, this was immediately the first text that came to mind. And I think it's interesting, this truth-telling piece. I feel like learning to listen to my intuition and trust it has been a big part of my process, I think, of being more grounded in a love ethic. So it was the first one that came to mind. There's that. And I kind of felt in my spirit it's that book. Um, I was also starting a new love relationship, which I think I told you about. So there was that part.
Mm.
And then I also, the where I grabbed the book from, I did this arts and education program 10 years ago now, almost 11.
Yep.
And we have these reunion gatherings. And in one of our gatherings early in the year, the activity we did was building an altar to the future we want to create.
Mm.
And this book sits on that altar for me. So, yeah, I think a lot of this just came from my spirit. But yeah, those are some of the reasons I chose it.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
Um, so, Bell Hooks frames love as an active choice rooted in will and discipline rather than just a feeling. And so I'm wondering, as a leadership trainer and community organizer, how does this definition of love shape your approach to building sustainable and justice-oriented movements?
Yeah. Um, I know I wrote it down. There's a quote in the book where she says, where is it? Yeah, she says, indeed, all the great movements for social justice in our society have strongly emphasized a love ethic.
Mm.
And I think for me, in terms of approach to building sustainable justice-oriented movements and my particular role and passion, and I think this is something you and I have connected on, I love to work with young people.
Yep.
Originally as a high school teacher, now primarily in this, community organizing world. And I think an important part of being grounded in a love ethic is self-love. And I know for me and for a lot of the young folks I'm building with, a lot of the adult folks I'm building with, the systems we've grown up under have worked really hard to teach us to hate ourselves.
Yep.
Um, and I think I've experienced, not always, but often in organizing spaces, movement work, that sometimes this idea of love and collective care and things like that are seen as kind of soft or off to the side priorities. And
Mm.
we have to really focus on the work or we have to really focus on shifting power. And that's not, we do have to focus on shifting power. I agree with that. But I think to me, for adults and young folks, we have to do that work of unlearning, of actively loving ourselves.
Yep.
And then I don't think you can truly love the folks around you. I think you can try your best, but you can do that at a different level. At least that's been my experience when you can grow in your own self-love. Does that resonate with your experience? I'm curious.
Absolutely. I mean, it immediately made me think of a couple episodes ago. I interviewed my dear friend Asena Tuyoni, and she was talking about this book, Inner Engineering, but essentially was, saying a lot of like really similar pieces just around like, you know, the the ability essentially that we have to um, yeah, to love, support others, to, show up bravely in the world is incumbent upon like how much work we do to heal ourselves, to love ourselves. Right. And I think in this period, for me personally, where there's been a lot of transition, yeah, there's just been like uh this like comes from a Simpsons episode that the writer Kaveh Akbar put on my radar recently, but like it's like the Chinese character for crisis also is the same for opportunity, or something akin to that. And
Mm-hmm.
and so I've just been like thinking, I feel like there's been a lot of feelings of like, oh shit, this is, like a lot of discomfort, but also within that, a lot of opportunity to, look at places that are ripe for healing around, some of the things you just mentioned about
Mm-hmm.
our society and world, in so many ways teaching us that loving ourselves is not a good thing. And yeah, and all the questions that arise from like, why is that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, hearing that from you and thinking about, yeah, movement work, where we are as a country, I don't know who said this. I'm sure multiple people have said this, but the idea that we either act from love or fear, and that's really like the core two emotions. And one of my mentors, something he's pointed out again and again with this past election is that both sides were grounded in fear. One side, I mean, I don't have to explain that. And so I think, I'm not a big fan of the Democratic Party right now, but I think a big opportunity that was missed was grounding in this fear of what could happen versus offering a vision
Mhm.
for what we could be, where we could go. And I think our movements, um, there are a lot of real constraints, I think, around that sort of visioning when people are fighting to get basic needs met on a day-to-day basis. And I do feel like that shift away from fear is so powerful. So I love what you said about crisis and opportunity because it is a choice. It's like there are ways we can look at these things. But I think there's a certain amount of resourcing and work we have to do to be able to respond with love versus react with fear, if that makes
Mhm. Totally. I love that. And you know what it's making me think of is like the relationship between well, because I think if I'm not mistaken, wasn't it Erica Badu that said that? The piece about like love or fear, or at
I
least
have no idea, but I would
it
not
was
be surprised if it was.
it was some record. It might have been like New America 2 or something, but I
Mhm.
remember first hearing that from Erica Badu, whether she coined it or not. But I was thinking about the relationship between love and fear because I think uh, as I've shared with you before, like, Cornell West's work means a lot to me. And so a lot of like, when I was like at SF State and, putting together my like master's thesis was around creating what I called like a pedagogy of courage. And a lot
Mhm.
of it was like rooted in his definitions of courage. And even like just recently, I don't remember where it was, but I heard like Brene Brown say something about like courage is like being chicken shit and like doing it anyway.
Yeah.
And so I think like love in a lot of ways, right, isn't like the absence of fear, but it's like acknowledges that it's there, but still, kind of takes leaps of faith in the direction of truth, of justice, of humanity at its best. But yeah, I'm gonna think about that a lot, like the relationship between love and fear. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on like love and fear and I don't know, some sort of yin yang
I
relationship?
sure do. I feel like when I pick up this book, I've had a tendency to focus on particular chapters, and I'm not super proud of this, but the honesty chapter was not one I think I've spent a lot of time with. So I was really happy to read it really carefully,
Mm,
in getting ready for this. And I bring it up in relation to love and fear because it just reminded me I'll speak for myself how much courage it takes to act from a place of love.
mm,
And I feel like I've been in an interesting season in life where personally and professionally I have opportunities to exercise that courage. And it's
mm.
scary as fuck. And I'm like, this is terrifying.
Yeah.
And I've had to do things where I don't feel I'm not like grounded in a particular, like, this is what I want to say, this is what I want to do, but I am grounded in a knowledge that I'm going to speak from my heart and be honest and hope and trust that the other person can receive that, that this space that we're building professionally can receive that. And yeah, I think in terms of the relationship between love and fear, yeah, I do appreciate the reminder that I really do believe that love takes a lot of courage, especially if I think Bell Hooks talks about this in quite a bit in the book, have experienced rejection
Mm,
or experienced pain in moments where you've tried to exercise courage and vulnerability as it relates to, sharing emotion, being loving, however you might define that. And I think there's lots of folks, including myself, who, if that happens to you when you're younger, it's hard. Like it's hard to I don't know if overcome is the right word, but like manage that as you're moving throughout the world.
Yep, 100%. This is a nice segue into, this next question that I have for you. And in All About Love, Hooks critiques the ways in which our culture often conflates love with abuse, control, or domination. And so I'm wondering, how have you seen this dynamic play out in organizing spaces, or, and I have in parentheses, white supremacist patriarchal leadership structures? And how do you, believe that, it can be interrupted?
Yeah, when I first saw this question, it like hurt
Yeah.
my heart a little bit. And I feel like this is something when you and I were, getting to know each other that we talked about a lot. I mean, I feel like we've talked about it throughout our time of being friends, but I feel like, unfortunately, I've seen really unhealthy dynamics play out in organizing spaces and leadership structures as long as I've been in them.
Yep. Hmm.
And I think, unfortunately, it's usually what happens is there is a male identified leader in these spaces who may be very talented, may be very visionary, may have certain language that, yeah, offers something to the space and to the work. But in actual interpersonal interactions, there is abuse, there is control, there is domination. Um, I've seen it more often than I would care to ever see it.
Yeah.
Uh, so that'd be my answer to the first part of the question. Um, in terms of how can we interrupt it, I mean, I I would love to hear your thoughts on this,
Hmm.
but what that part of the question makes me think of, how can we interrupt it? I have a colleague who I really love, a fairly new colleague, and we were kind of talking about this, and she said to me, her experience is that a lot of folks that she's built with in movement work came to movement work out of trauma that we've experienced
Hmm.
from
Oh,
the different
different
systems.
topics. Yep.
Yes. And so, what happens when you put a bunch of folks together who have experienced a lot of trauma and have not began their healing work or had access to begin that work?
Hmm.
Certain dynamics are going to play out. And so, yeah, I'm thinking they're like some of the men that I have been in these spaces with, I'm thinking about it. And, when Hooks offers that definition of love as extending yourself for someone's spiritual growth, to me, that spiritual growth piece means you have to be awake to a certain extent to connect with that spirituality.
Hmm.
And I wonder about, I don't want to put it all on men. I'm sure there are women in spaces who also operate this way. I just haven't. My experience has been with men.
Yeah.
I don't know what it,
Please share your experience.
yeah, yeah. They are, it seems, not even awake to the fact that they are doing these things. Or if, yeah, in the interactions I've had, the conversations I've had. And so, yeah, I guess a question for me is how we interrupt it. Do those folks need support in waking up? I, I don't know, but I do know, I think for my own perspective and work, it's how do we bring love in as early as possible, especially for young men. And I feel so grateful that I've gotten to work with younger students, with high school students, and have had the privilege to work with a lot of young men who I'm still in relationship with who I don't know if this is true everywhere, but I've been really proud to see them exercise a different kind of masculinity, a different kind of vulnerability. And I hope that that carries over into whatever spaces they choose to occupy. But I think my short answer is I don't know how we interrupt it. I would love to know. I'm very curious what your thoughts are on that.
Oh man, I mean, I don't have any answers either, but I'm like I mean, my mind, tends to go like multiple places at once when I kind of think about, these really complex questions. And so like the first place it went was like remembering that this book was written in 1999 and a lot of the language in it is like conflates being male with being a boy or a man or like or being female with a girl or a woman. And
Hmm.
so like, I just think about, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, younger generations and their growing all of us in like in understanding different complexities of gender identity, of sexuality, of different expressions of love as
Hmm.
action, and
Yeah.
the ways that I continue to be humbled, and like the ways that like I still regularly will fuck up and like forget someone's gender pronoun and like say the wrong one and like and always do my best to like um you know apologize and correct myself. Just like I think so that was one thought. It was just like, in what ways do we take this ancestors' powerful work and think about the context with when, when it was 1999, like, Instagram, social media, TikTok were like not things, right? And so it's like
Right.
there's so many huge dynamics of just like how our brains are impacted through pop culture because of those kinds of things that I think are mostly really toxic and reinforce white supremacist patriarchy and and those things. But that's one thought, and then the other one is around I don't know, like that's just thinking about what actually are our sphere of influences, and so like just even us having this conversation together, I think is a tiny step in trying to think, we're like literally in this moment explicitly having this conversation about these things and trying to think well together in dialogue about them.
Hmm.
And so I try not to dismiss, things that are seemingly small, like this moment that we're having
Hmm.
right now together. Um, because even just already in our conversation, there's so many things that you've said that have been like blown my mind and then be like, yeah, okay, I need to think about that or that or that. But I think, yeah, what you said resonated deeply as far as like thinking about young people, um, and um, and and I think in that, like in thinking about young people, love, um, I think in our society and world, and maybe particularly our generation as we grew up, and definitely the generations before us, I feel like there's this really white supremacist, cishet, patriarchal, like Disneyland bullshit kind of definition of love that we were fed that's like, love is the absence of conflict and everything is feels perfect. And it's like, the prince rescuing the princess type shit. And right. And so it's
Yeah.
like, in my experience, one of the many reasons that I love um, uh, raised working class people of color is there is a uncanny ability to recognize that love does not mean the absence of conflict, right? That they're, sometimes like you got to tell somebody about themselves to like shake them out of some bullshit that they're doing. And it's gonna
Hmm.
hurt their feelings initially, right? And I say this as somebody who's had that done to me, right? Like multiple times. And like ultimately maybe I was like, oh, that shit hurts, right? But it like, and it's not always the best right way to do it. Just like, get on someone's helmet and roast the shit out of them. But I do think, that love as action can look so many different ways. And I particularly look to people raised poor, working class, people of color, women, femmes, queer folks, when I think about love as action in the ways that I've, felt like I've received the best education around what that actually is and how we interrupt these things.
Yeah. 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 I mean, what you're saying reminds me of a couple of things. One that I do want to say, I feel like my original introduction to a particular community organizing framework was at Harvard. And it wasn't, I mean, it came from someone who was a civil rights activist and, organize with the farm workers, but I talk about a white patriarchal, like fucked up institution. I probably shouldn't say that, but whatever. I feel like I'm saying that because I have a huge privilege now of being at an organization that supports a lot of grassroots work and getting to work with men, male identified folks, masculine folks who I know are showing up differently and going to therapy and are super cognizant of ways that they move in the world. And I hadn't thought about that originally when I read this question, but hearing your reflections, I'm like, I know folks who are leading huge organizations and it's not easy and they've made mistakes and they own up to it and show up in a way that's, you know, not reinforcing traditional definitions of masculinity. There's a lot more gentleness, there's empathy, there's more, and so maybe we are moving forward in a healthy way. And I was just, some of my experiences have been in places that I don't consider the healthiest.
Mhm. Yeah, and and I'm really confident that it can be both of those things that I'm sure, it's good to recognize the progress that is or has been made, and also, I know that I don't know the degrees to which, you have and continue to suffer because of being targeted by sexism and male domination. So yeah, I'd say that. So thank you for sharing. And in um, in this vein of kind of the love ethic that Hooks talks about, right? She calls for this love ethic to be integrated into every facet of our lives, including work, right? And so, some of what we talk about, is our labor, right? As educators, as organizers. And so I'm curious kind of what thoughts come to mind for you when I ask, what would a love ethic look like in the context of education, nonprofit leadership, or grassroots training programs, like Hope Come University or the Warmth Fellowship, or what has that looked like for you?
Yeah. Um, what would a love ethic look like? Yeah, I I really like what Hooks says about, hold on. I know this is here somewhere. Uh, some of the ingredients that come to mind when we're talking about love. So in one part, she says, when we are loving, we openly and honestly express care, affection, responsibility, respect, commitment, and trust.
Mm,
And she goes on to say, definitions are vital starting points for the imagination. What we cannot imagine cannot come into being. And so that makes me think of a couple things in terms of what this could look like. I can talk about what it has looked like, especially with the Warm Fellowship, what we've tried to create. But this piece of we need definitions so that we can imagine actually reminds me of one of the most pivotal conversations I've witnessed. I got to see Angela Davis in conversation with Grace Lee Boggs in 2011.
amazing.
There was a Women of Color conference at Berkeley that I went to. I think it was my first year teaching or second year teaching. And they talked about their philosophy backgrounds and how important it is for them that they're both philosophers and activists because it allows for, I don't remember the exact wording, but it was something along the lines of a radical reimagining of our current circumstances versus being confined to critique. And so,
Whew.
yeah. I'm so grateful that I heard that conversation and I feel like that has stayed with me. It's in my mind all the time. And so, yeah, I think that to integrate a love ethic, we need to give some space to really imagining what that can look like, and to do that collectively and to do it creatively. And I'll say for warmth, the way that fellowship came about, I was working with a group of young folks in the Sunrise Movement
Mm,
and was noticing that there were a lot of young white men in the positions of leadership who I was being asked to mentor.
Hmm.
I was like,
How was that for you?
right. I was like, why? This is strange. And then, I started to connect with more of the young women of color in that space and recognize that a lot of them, unsurprisingly, were doing a huge amount of labor and moving work forward, but we're not getting mentorship and we're not getting access to leadership positions. And I was like, I'm not mentoring. You know what I'm going to do instead of what you're asking me to do? I am going to try to create a space that meets what these young women are asking for. So I collaborated with one of them to create this program. And originally, it was going to be just a place to sharpen community organizing skills. That's all we were going to do. But in working with my collaborator, her name's Deja, Deja expressed that if she could see whatever she wanted to see in the space, she would love to feel connected and supported in the space, and talked about how burnt out she's seeing folks were and, those kind of things. And so in Warmth, what we did is we split our sessions when we met into a community care section and then whatever the skill practice was for that day, that session. And one of our grounding community agreements was actually a bell hooks quote that said, "Self-love does not flourish in isolation." And so me and the fellows who are in the program shared that community care piece, and a different person led it every time. And some folks brought poems and we talked about poems. Some folks brought just prompts for us to discuss in kind of a circle practice. There were lots of different arts activities. Um, so all of that to say, I think whatever a love ethic is going to look like, I think it has to be co-created and explored with the folks you want to flourish with, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and I also appreciate like, your nod to, particularly if you're like supporting young people in development around that, like how important it is to like be curious about what they need and what they want, or like supporting them as they figure that out, right? Because a big piece in the beginning of this book was like that, like I was like thinking about last night actually, like when I was like laying in bed and not able to fall asleep, and was like she was talking extensively about how essentially like ageism, adultism operates, and how like there was this like I think she was sitting with a room of parents and they were talking about like parenting and how
Hmm.
essentially like abusive and dominating there'd be over their children, and like like, oh, like I don't hit them, but like I will pinch the shit out of like their little arm until they get it that like they can't do that anymore. And and bell hooks essentially saying like you know if like I had replaced that with like this dad, like, or this man doing that to like his woman partner, that like everybody in the room would be like, that is abusive and totally not okay. But the unconscious degrees to which young people, children, are dehumanized and like not taken seriously, um just being at the heart of lovelessness, particularly as we think about what does the future hold, and just like the children we see in Sudan or Gaza, like just like how much it becomes clear that so much of critical mass of adults in the world like don't care about children.
Hmm.
It's a little bit of a tangent, but um yeah, just something that kind of popped into my head, via the things you were sharing.
Doesn't feel like a tangent to me. I mean, it makes me think about, because okay, if we're looking at love, a love ethic and movement work, why do we have movement work? We want to create a world where children can thrive, right? And um, the first time I read this text, I think the biggest lesson it taught me, or the biggest thing that stuck with me, is that we are not taught how to love.
Yeah.
And I think about parenting and how for a lot of folks, they parent the way they were parented. And if you were parented in a way where I did this because my parents loved me and cared about me, so I'm going to do this, I'm first generation immigrant households. Like I I can understand why some of those things happen and parents genuinely think this is what's best for my child. This is, whatever. Um,
Yeah.
and how important it is to interrupt that. And, my friends who are new parents who kind of have that background, how hard it is for them to shift into different patterns and different ways of parenting because it's not what they experienced. Anyway, so to me, it's not a tangent. It's kind of like the core of the matter.
Mm. Ooh, man. Well, in thinking about moving into the future, right, the book, places strong emphasis on healing, both
Mm,
individual and collective. Um,
mhm.
and so curious, like in your experience, what has, maybe worked well or things that you thought about with regards to supporting healing in your work with young femmes of color, and how might storytelling, which I know is very important to both of us as former English teachers, serve as a tool for that process in your experience?
Yeah. Um, I think healing with young femmes of color, I think the storytelling piece, it's so important that it happens in community. I think this piece of sharing story and getting to witness is a big, big piece of healing. And, you know, the way I've been trained in terms of storytelling as an organizing tool, is that our stories are a way to reconnect, rediscover our values, the values that we're really grounded in and acting from. Yeah, and I know for myself, when I was first exploring this tool of story of self and public narrative, um, I was constantly being asked by my coach, like, why did you become a teacher? Why did you become a teacher? And I kept talking about different students that I loved and the work and blah, 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 blah. And he kept saying, okay, you keep telling me why you love the work. I don't know why you became a teacher. And so in doing some of the, reflecting and really trying to think about, yeah, why did I make that choice? What informed that? I got, sort of taken back or in my reflection, taken back in my memory to my own schooling and things that I think I'd either repressed or just hadn't thought about in many, many years. And I remembered, I was born in New York and went to public school for kindergarten, but then we moved to Connecticut and I was put in this all white Catholic school. Um, and was getting bullied a lot by students, and my teachers were terrible. And I went from, a very vibrant young person to a very unhappy young person. And thank God I had this incredible third grade teacher who really created a space for me where I felt super seen, super loved, and supported. I don't think that's the only reason I became a teacher, but I'm sharing that because this storytelling practice reconnected me to that and also to other moments in my life where I made what I felt were courageous decisions around creating loving spaces for young people. And that, I mean, I think that has done a lot of things, but one of the things it's done is resourced me in the work that I'm doing. And it's something I can return to and that re-energizes me. I think I can also then share that with folks I'm working with so they know where I'm coming from. And it's, sort of a relational basis. So in terms of healing and storytelling, I see storytelling as a way to really resource ourselves in
Mm.
this work. And I think one thing in particular I loved about the Warmth Fellowship, the way that we opened that space, our very first session, was asking whose stories do you want to bring in the room with you?
Yeah.
And so everyone shared stories about different ancestors that, you
Dope.
know, have influenced them in various ways. And, I think there's certain things about love and particular experiences that you can't really put into words, right? It's just like a feeling. The feeling, it was a Zoom call, but the feeling in that sharing was just so beautiful and so powerful. And yeah, I feel like I'm rambling now, but those are my thoughts on that question.
So much. Yeah, I mean, that's amazing that happened via Zoom too, because, like this was like a while back, but I was like talking with my homie, her name's Terry Cowie. She's an incredible educator, principal in East Palo Alto. And we met because we were kind of we were at different school sites, but we were the co-facilitators of the AAPI affinity group for Aspire Public Schools for the Bay Area region, and
Mhm.
like built like a really dope friendship, through Zoom, and built like community with AAPI educators in the Bay Area through Zoom, and I think there was a lot of um, generally older heads, but like myself included, that was like, man, like we have to get back to in person because you can't do anything, virtually. Like it just doesn't work, and it's like not entirely true. And so, yeah, just like that was the first thing I thought when just like I was like, because I was picturing this in my mind as you were talking, like people sitting in a circle in person, like looking at each other.
Mhm.
This was on Zoom. That's incredible. And oh, what was the other thought? Oh my God, oh my God. I hate when this happens. This is my brain. Um,
You can interrupt me also. I know
no, no,
I
no.
thought for a long time. I don't want you to lose the questions that come up.
That's the last thing I want to do. I think, well, let's see. So, yeah, I'm thinking about love ethic, and I'm thinking about a couple things. Storytelling. And
Mm,
I think so much of like what's made me, I'm deeply imperfect. Right. I think that, boys, men were socialized, cis boys, cis men socialized from very, very young to just have like absolute fucking garbage in our heads about perceptions of womanhood, of femmes, of female body people. And I was like talking with one of my homies, but essentially, and this is not the only one, but just like her talking about being like um, a woman, cis woman is attracted to cis men, and like how like rough that is, like to just like know that like I would argue because there's a lot of men who will like bristle when they hear men are trash, and I absolutely do not. I believe that a critical mass of men have very much trash-like sensibilities, um and we're socialized to be that way, right? And I
I'm
think
sorry, trash like sensibilities is just hilarious. But
right.
sorry, go
And
ahead, go
so
ahead.
well, and so I think about um love ethic from a cishet male perspective being like my intentionally working over time to not interrupt, women when they're
Mm,
talking, right? And to really, really like work on my ability just to pay attention, um,
mm,
and how that has, manifested in me just gaining so much wisdom from the women in my lives, in my life, um, because of just actively working on that one skill, not interrupting and paying attention and listening, right? And so, um, you know, when it comes to storytelling, right, I was like, how do I close the loop? Storytelling, right? So much of my growth and I would just say becoming a better person, moving forward has been in my like figuring out like if I you know, am able and willing to not interrupt, women when they're talking and to deeply listen and pay attention, that it is actually something that has and will continue to grow my mind, my heart, my spirit, um,
mm,
and essentially make me better at loving people as an action. Because then, the last thing I'll say is, remembering my other, dear friend, he was a professor, talking about um, just the ways in her career that all of that behind the scenes work that you were discussing with some of your mentees, just like how women and femmes, do so much of that and it goes unrecognized. And it's like, I mean, think of Black Panthers, right? It's like none of that shit holds up or sustains or is successful without all this behind the scenes work that is deemed f feminine, right? And generally it's like who gets to be the face? It's generally the male-bodied folks, right? That like get to be the face of like this the achievements and shit, and just
Mhm.
trash like sensibility that all is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it reminds me too that at least half of the power of storytelling and healing is the witnessing. And it matters that the folks who we are sharing our stories with are truly present and listening from a particular place. You know what I mean? And I feel like when I think about the folks who were in warmth, it was not just when they were storytelling that they were offering powerful presence. You know, you could just see there was deep care when folks were witnessing each other. And so, yeah, what you said just reminded me of that as far as storytelling is concerned.
Well, and this you yeah, you keep guiding us perfectly into these questions,
Yeah.
but one is that, Hooks critiques the idea that love is a private emotion, instead proposing that love is a public political act. And so I'm curious, what does that idea mean to you, and how have you seen love function as a political force in your organizing work or in your teaching?
Mm,
We're already speaking to this.
yeah. You know, okay, a couple things come to mind. I'm gonna butcher this quote, but I feel like you will know it. There's a Cornell West quote about love with justice, love without justice, or justice without love. Do you know that? You know what I'm talking about?
It's correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's something like love is what justice looks like in public.
Yeah.
Is that it?
Yeah. There's another, maybe it's not Cornell West. It's love is what justice looks like in public. There's some other quote, I'll figure it out and send it to you, where essentially it says just love without justice is meaningless, just as justice without love is meaningless. And so I will say at the baseline that I agree that love needs to be a public political act and that we can't have justice without love. I
Yeah.
think we also cannot have love without justice. This question trips me up a little bit because, in terms of seeing love function as a force in organizing, my humble opinion is that a lot of what is holding back certain aspects of organizing work is when love is not present or not centered or not seen as a discipline that we need to incorporate. And yeah, there's a lot of different folks doing movement work who are, I think, putting love in action in different ways. But I do feel like I've had so much experience supporting community organizers at different parts of their journey and different strategic moments. And, it kind of brings me back to the beginning, this idea of needing to love ourselves, needing to do certain unlearning. And I don't want to paint too broad of strokes because I don't think this is true across the board, but I do feel like a hope I have for our organizing work, and I've seen a lot of glimmers of hope in this sense, is that people want love to be actively spoken as a driving force. And I don't know that I see that much. Which is interesting though, because I feel like when I really get to know the organizers that I've worked with, the reason they're doing the work is out of love. There's a deep love for people because a lot of folks that come and they've had these difficult experiences, just because that happens to you does not mean that you want to give time and energy to supporting other folks. It's interesting. I feel like a lot of folks that I work with who are organizers, when we do the story of self work and I ask them, you know, where did this desire come to really support community or whatever the case may be? And often they'll say something like, well, you know, I had this experience, so of course I had to do something about it for my community. And I'll usually ask something like, does everyone you know who's had that experience, have they made that choice to do that? And they'll be like, oh, no. And you know, so we'll and every obviously everybody has a different story, but more often than not, it comes from a place of really deep love. And so I guess I would say I think I've seen love function as a driving force in organizing work for folks. I'd love to see it proclaimed more courageously. I may probably need to give some thought about what that would look like, but when we're in our collective spaces and talking about organizing and talking about strategy,
Mm.
um, as far as teaching, yeah, I mean, teaching is a deep love of mine. And I think one thing that's been interesting, because I'm in a kind of different role now, I think it was easier to ground myself in love when I was a K through 12 teacher because of the power dynamic. Because, yeah, and it was interesting. I just had this experience this week where I had to share my story with my colleagues. And I so often work with high school students, college students, and I have no problem sharing, you know, my story of self. I got up in front of my colleagues and I was terrified.
I feel
I
you.
was like, what is going on here? And so I will say in teaching, I think I'm very grateful that I got to ground in a love ethic and bring that to my classroom and, you know, luckily be in spaces where I wasn't being supervised super heavily. So I could think about ways to be very creative that we have certain conversations or engage with each other in particular ways. And I always wanted to make sure that my students knew that I loved them and cared about them deeply. Not through I wouldn't, I don't know that I would say that to them, but I would try to show it, you know, in my actions and
Um,
how I supported them and their families. Um, yeah, I had another, oh yeah, so I was saying what happened with work this week. Yeah, and I think again, this love is courage thing. I was like, it's hard to show up vulnerably and let yourself be seen. And for me, I'm like, the story I was sharing is about why I do the work that I do, where my values come from. Why is it scary to do this? And so, um, I think I'm being challenged now in the season that I'm in to actively act from this love ethic in a place that's a little bit harder than where I've been before. And so, yeah, I think I'm seeing it function and learning how to function in a different way. I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but that's what comes to
oh
mind.
no, that's absolutely. And yeah, it's interesting how like Cornel West has joined Bell Hooks in this dialogue we've had today. But I was thinking, you know, he said it's young people don't want to hear a sermon, they want to see a sermon. And I feel like that really goes hand in hand with the love as an action as opposed to this kind of just like, yeah, like I don't know, feeling that you feel all by yourself in your room at night while listening to like love songs and things like that. I mean, I think that it can encompass all of it, but
Yeah.
yeah. Um, let's see, let's see. Let me jump to this one actually. So, um, you know, and these are things we've already been talking about, but right, Hooks argues that to truly love, we must commit to justice, right? And you were just, you know, speaking about this multiple times. In a world where burnout, cynicism are so common in social justice, educational spaces, organizing spaces, how do you feel like we can potentially cultivate a love ethic that's both radical and also sustainable?
Ooh.
No, right?
Um, I mean, yeah. Well, one of the things this makes me think of, I wrote down a question that I had for you that I think is very related to this question. I'll answer and then I want to share that question with you. I think part of my answer goes back to what you said earlier about us having this conversation and that not being a small thing. And I do think bringing in the conversation into our spaces of, are we grounding in a love ethic? What does that look like? What does I don't know if this is exactly what would be posited, but what disciplines do we have around showing love to ourselves and to each other? I do really feel like cultivating a love ethic that's radical and sustainable, that has to be a conversation with the collective you're building with. And so I think a big piece of it is making it a priority. The question that I had for you though, this definition of um where is it? I wrote this down. Uh love as where is it? Oh yeah, so in one of the earlier pieces, there's this quote, and I wrote it down. So she says, an individual does not need to be a believer in religion to embrace the idea that there is an animating principle in the self, a life force, some of us call it soul, that when nurtured, enhances our capacity to be more fully self-actualized and able to engage in communion with the world around us. And this is providing some context to the definition of love as a will to extend yourself for another's spiritual growth. And yeah, a question that comes up for me that I would love to know your answer to, but is my question in response to this question is, how do you nurture a soul? What does that mean? Like, what does that look like to do that individually and collectively?
Oh,
I don't know.
goodness gracious, what a question. Oh man.
Come
Um,
on, Professor Ihara.
oh my goodness. Well, okay. Let's just see where my wild ass Gemini brain goes with this.
First draft answer.
Okay, yeah. Okay. Man. Okay. So before the pandemic, right before the pandemic began, I did a keynote for the Rock the School Bells conference, hip hop
I
education
love that
company.
conference.
Yeah, in and it was at College of San Mateo where, I was last year I was at Kenyatta College, I mean, one of the sister community colleges over there. But the theme of that talk and of the conference was soul, right? So it was like
Mm,
note on soul. And and I think, it was a couple of things, right? So the first I kind of opened by quoting James Brown, the godfather of soul, and uh him talking about being stillborn and then him coming back to life as a baby after he was just born, and how like
whoa.
essentially y'all know, right? Like how the godfather of soul, was stillborn and then came back to life, and that like he essentially talked about the quote, I can't remember verbatim, but he said in the quote like that, like God brought him back to life and was like, no, like you have a purpose here. Um and um and so and I spoke, did my best to speak very, very directly and explicitly to um, you know, the kind of the heart, the mind, the spirit, and kind of like um this engagement just like with our life force, that we carry. That a couple of things I wanted to say explicitly during that keynote were that I think that the best things that have and maybe continue to come out of the United States of America come from Black folks.
Mhm,
I think that nobody, for example, I think nobody does Christianity, for example, better than Black folks. I think that, and I think particularly, right, like, philosophy, here comes Cornel West again, right? He taught me that, philosophy essentially is like meditation on preparation for death, whether that's our
mm,
actual death or it's like a metaphorical death where we like unlearn things and become better, bigger versions of ourselves as we're reborn.
mhm,
But I say all that just because of the historical ways that Black folks have been targeted for domination or destruction, particularly in U.S. society, but also in the world, and all of the um, the visionary wisdom that that Black folks have had to kind of encompass in order to survive, those horrors, right? And so essentially in that keynote, I said that, that I felt like it's a soulless act, to be, a hip hop lover, fan, practitioner who is not Black if you're not, regularly explicitly naming, right, that it is a Black art form, um, created out of those conditions, right? And so I think, yeah, so to this question of like, how do we, I don't know, like nurture, protect, sustain the soul? It's like, I think it's like I haven't continued to look to ancestors, people who are still alive, who I think have had the deepest understandings of like of that those kinds of philosophizing, of really being, even, whether it was like being forced to or choosing to like stare literal or metaphorical death in the face and having that courage.
Mhm.
Like, I think that's where my mind goes as far as like, the vast majority of any lessons that I've learned via witnessing or listening or experienced myself, right, have
Mhm.
been tied to, James Baldwin says the only way to get through life is to know the worst things about it, right? And so, and I think all of that kind of ties back into this love ethic as action of like really, yeah, trying to muster the courage to not let fear have the last word, even though it is regularly omnipresent. Um, did that answer a little bit kind of what you?
Yeah. Oh, I wish I could. Did they record that keynote?
Yeah, I could send it to you.
I would love to listen to it. Yeah, no, it definitely answers. And it makes me think about a a lot of the women in my life who I connect with in movement work are Black women who have a deep spiritual practice. And it looks
Mm.
different for those different folks. Some are deeply Christian. I have a friend who I don't know exactly how they would describe their faith practice, but it's more connected to sort of like indigenous practices and um, orishas and practices I'm less familiar with. And it's interesting because I don't know that I have a lot of conversations explicitly in my organizing spaces about faith and connection to God and connection to source, whatever that means to folks. But with the people I'm doing the work with and who, you know, I think our conversations really nourish me. And I think the way we show up in the world and the way we do our work is very much, connected to this connection to source and nourishing that connection, tuning into that connection. So I'm grateful for your answer because it reminds me of that piece. And yeah, I do believe that connecting to that source is key to radical, sustainable love ethic.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm. Um, let's see. So we're starting to come, towards the end here. But and I think I just have a question just popped into my mind that I think
Mhm.
I'll do for after this.
Okay.
Maybe at the very, very end, but yeah, so next question is if you could bring a passage or a core message, that you've interpreted from All About Love into every room you train in, whether with youth, educators, or organizers, what would it be and why?
I wrote something because I really wanted to think about this, but I think I have a different response now after our conversation.
Mm,
Initially, my thought was the core message I'd want to bring is that love takes courage. But I think, especially in revisiting the honesty chapter today, I think that that particular passage, I think it's actually the one that you shared, that to know love, yeah, to know love, we have to tell the truth to ourselves and others. Creating a false self to mask fears and insecurities has become so common that many of us forget who we are and what we feel underneath the pretense.
Yeah.
Breaking through this detail is always the first step in uncovering our longing to be honest and clear. I think this truth-telling piece is so important, and I also feel like if I was going to bring this into every room I train in, I would want to bring it with some questions for folks to explore. Because I don't really believe in like, I'm going to tell you this thing and you should feel like it's important. I'm like, especially in a training space, I'm like, let's offer this up and explore it in different ways. So, yeah, I'm not sure exactly what the questions would be that I pair that with, but I think that would be the passage. Yeah.
Gorgeous. Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Um, let's see. I'm trying to decide. Do I want to ask this question before? Let me ask you. So, and you don't know what the question is, but
I don't.
would you like to end with, my asking you about song, musical artist stuff and and like why you would recommend this book, or would you like to end with a surprise question?
I would like to end in whatever way the spirit moves you. Whatever your intuition is telling you, I trust you.
Okay.
Either way works for me.
Okay. Okay. That's what's up. So I will end with the surprise question if that's what.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, that's
Okay.
cool. Fun.
So, as we close, and these are questions that I always ask my guests. And again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you, family. What is a song, a musical artist, and/or album you would pair with Bell Hooks' All About Love, and why?
Yeah. I feel like I'm gonna cheat a little bit because I have multiple. I don't know if that's cheating, but also thank you for having me. This has been amazing. I miss you.
I'm so happy that we get to do this. This is wonderful.
Yeah. So my three answers are Kendrick Lamar,
Hey,
Lauryn Hill, and Durand Bernard. And I'll give a quick explanation for each one.
okay.
I I think I sent you this link. I'm sure you've seen it, but Kendrick has this interview, I think it was 9 years ago, where he says essentially, when are we going to realize that we were put on this earth to love? And he goes on to say a few different things, but it's like, this is the point. This is the point of life to love. And so that's why Kendrick. With Lauren, well, Lauren Hill is my favorite artist, so I'm also a little bit biased, but I think the truth telling that love requires her she is an artist and her work embody that for me. This really brave truth telling that is grounded in love. And then Duran Bernard is a newer artist that I've discovered. And I went to their show recently, and I feel like Duran Bernard, the experience of their show is a love ethic.
Mm,
I don't know how to describe it, but
high praise, because I haven't heard of this artist, so now I definitely got to check them out.
listen, I think it has to be live, but I think
Okay.
I've watched a bunch of interviews with them, and I don't remember what pronouns they go by, so I'm gonna say they, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah.
Um, in their interviews, they talk about people recognizing their potential before they did, and then trying to kind of stomp it out of them,
Mm,
and how they've been able to get to a place where they know who they are and can live really courageously in who they are and their truth. And I think engaging with them and their art and just the way that they move in the world, at least from what I've seen in interviews, I'm like, this is a love ethic. This is a joyful, powerful love ethic. Yes. Sorry, three answers, but those are my answers.
I love it. I love it. Okay. Well, okay, this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna do the secret question and then end with the other one. So I'm gonna sandwich
Okay.
it. Okay.
Okay.
So the surprise question, I was reminded via one of my homegirls. I was talking about, I mean, this is, happened multiple times in my relationships with the brilliant, amazing women in my life. But I think so. Kiese Layman, one of my favorite writers, author of Heavy
Yeah.
and Long Division and How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America. He posted this thing a little ways back that really has stuck with me ever since. And he said something to the effect of like, like life is short. This is not verbatim, but ultimately it was asking like, you know, the people that you love, it's really important you ask them how do they want to be loved. All right. And so
Mm.
my question to you is, um, how do you want to receive love from me in our friendship?
How are you gonna, what a question. How do I want to receive love from you in our friendship? Um, I can tell you how I receive love in our friendship that I already appreciate because nothing is coming to mind in terms of something that's not already happening. I think I've probably shared this with you before in different ways, but I feel like I don't have a lot of men in my life who really see me, really respect what I have to say, and how do I say this? I think the combination of things actually that Hooks talks about, the responsibility, knowledge, commitment, care, all of those things. I think one thing I appreciate about you so much is you're one of the few men in my life who have you show me that consistently always. And I know I know I'm in all of my friendships, I don't do the best job of always keeping in touch. And you're gonna make me cry. I feel like whenever I get Marco Polos from you or messages from you when we speak on the phone, I feel like I always feel loved and seen. And I think the difference, and this struck me again in like revisiting the text, the difference between love and care. I think I've experienced a lot of people who care about me, luckily. I think it's more rare to be truly loved. And so, how do I want to? I mean, just keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, that's so kind. I really appreciate that. It means a
You
lot.
know, now you have to answer that question.
Oh man, okay. I
Because if
have
it's
been
in our
thinking.
friendship, it has to be,
Yeah.
reciprocal.
I mean, yeah, I think I have the same answer. Like or similar answer in that it's like I'm just like, yeah, like keep doing what you're doing. I don't think I've ever in our friendship ever felt like not cared about or unloved. Um, and maybe, and I think even in, where there's, been very few, but even in moments where like there's been tension, it's been just so like, for lack of a better word, loving. And so, I just would say maybe just encouraging you to continue to, yeah, be real and honest with me if and when, regardless of whether things, feel good or they don't. And I just have, so much gratitude for all the ways you have and continue to, yeah, trust, me as a friend, as a comrade, as chosen family that will do everything in my power to receive what you share with me with grace and gratitude. So yeah, thank you.
Can I add to my answer?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, because what you said reminded me of this. And this was all throughout our conversation today. I actually feel like that's one of the core pieces for me that in our friendship, there's been truth telling. There's been truth telling that I don't always get to experience in other relationships where I feel like there have been times where I'll share something. I don't remember specifics, but I'll share something about my teaching or something that's happening and you'll offer me a question that is not a critique, but it's a challenge. And I love it and appreciate it because I think when you really love someone, it's like what you said, there's not an absence of conflict. And
Mhm.
there's this truth telling that's really hard to do, I think. And so I just want to underscore that part that the truth telling piece, I know for me, is not always easy. And I think our friendship has been a place where that's been welcomed and encouraged. And I'm so grateful that it's there.
Mhm.
I miss you.
Samesies, samesies. Okay, well, as we close out, so the last piece I always ask guests to do is complete this sentence frame, and then the sentence frame is people should read All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks because dot dot dot.
Okay, people should read All About Love, New Visions by Bell Hooks because I said so. But no,
Hey.
no, no, no. I'll
That's
answer for
fucking
you.
right.
I mean, that's what came to mind first, but that's not the real answer. I think people should read All About Love, New Visions because of what Kendrick said. When you really get down to the core of it, to me, our life is about love. And I think what this book offers is a way to really think about what it means and how you can practice it in a disciplined way. I think it's a support. Um, like I don't, if I had never read this book, I don't know if the thought would have ever crossed my mind that I was not taught how to love and like what does that mean? And so yeah, I think if you want to practice love in action as a discipline, then you should read this book. Also because I said so.
Hell yeah, that's what's up. Beautifully said. Well, Anjali, my dear sister, my family, I love you so much. Thank you so much for being here today. This was a treat. And yeah, so to everybody out there, thank you so much for tuning in. And we hope you have a wonderful week ahead, and we hope that you enjoyed the flight. Peace.
Thank you for having me.
Yee.